Hey guys, welcome back to the Calvinist Contradiction. It's good to have you guys back. I thought today that we'd take a break from going through the biblical narrative, the opening sequence of Genesis, and that we would go through some of the comments because this isn't the only thing I do. I have a lot of kind of roles. I am a overseas church planter and watch over a church that we've planted. I have a kind of funeral thing where that's side job, or I don't know how to describe it, but I also perform funerals for expats over here. When they pass away, I have online ministries. This is just one of them. I have other ones teaching exclusively about the ancient Near Eastern context of the Bible. And this is kind of just merging a lot of things that are close to my heart because of my experience with Calvinism and Calvinism in secret Calvinists kind of taking over Christianity, in my opinion, of course, and just wanting to point out some of these contradictions that I've seen. And so I have some time to respond to questions that come up on the comments. And first off, I want to say thank you, everybody who has commented in the comment section. It's amazing seeing people liking and responding and joining the channel. It's just amazing, and I can't thank you guys enough. But also, I want to just take a time and use this little bit of time I have to respond to some of these questions instead of having to write them all out. Which, again, and I have three kids, a wife, and just I have a life outside of just the Calvinist contradiction as well. So let me just respond to some of these, and that will be the episode for today. But again, I want to preface, I want to say upfront that I am thankful, even though I may disagree with your conclusion, with your outcome. I'm thankful for all of you guys and your contribution to this channel. So last week, we get this a lot. A lot of times I'm asking rhetorical questions here. So I'm not so much asking to be taught what is Calvinism. I've studied Calvinism a lot, actually. Planting a church over here, I was asked to join a Calvinistic organization. And I read I studied it, you know, went to lessons from John Piper, not just from him, but really, prominent Calvinists, spoke with the Calvinists over here and just concluded that this is not the truth of the Bible. Therefore, I didn't join. But just as much, I, studied it a lot, and I am in contact with Calvinists all the time. And so I'm not like literally asking these questions like wanting you to respond as some of the brothers and sisters have on the channel. It's a rhetorical question. I'm asking you, where and can you defend Calvinism in these texts? And I haven't really gotten those in the comment section. Go and check for yourself. It's more so this explaining of a New Testament centered theology around Calvinism, and then they're shoving it back into Genesis. And I'm saying the opposite. If uh, Calvinism is true biblical theology, where is it in Genesis 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and then 12? And so, like, this sweet brother writes in there, oh, I don't understand how you're talking about where's Calvinism in Genesis 13. He didn't take the time to even look that we went through Genesis 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and talked about the call of Abraham. And he just hops in here and then he starts explaining Calvinism with a Calvinistic perspective. So, um, there's no free will in the Bible. There's no Calvinism either. Well, what we're trying to say is there is free will. Well, there is a free will theodicy. That's why we started in Genesis 1, because God placing, spiritual and physical neutral beings in the garden. What is your conclusion here? God made them sin. He puts the tree in the garden and then makes them sin. And he says, don't eat from that because you'll die, but I'm going to make you eat from that and die. So that's the rhetorical question I'm asking there. What is Calvinism's thought behind this? Well, then Adam had free will. He's the only true being that had free will. Again, not stated there. And so a lot of these things are implied. And so, okay, Adam had it, but it was, lost after that. Well, where in the text does it say that? That's what we're asking. That's the rhetorical question. So I don't want you to literally, although I don't mind, come in and using your time to teach about Calvinism, which I already know. I'm asking you to use your time to show me where Calvinism is in the text, which hasn't been done yet, and then so what as free will, the word free will is not clearly and stated, but as we've shown many times, where the example that's coming to my mind, Abraham, I had to swear to the Lord that I wouldn't take from the king of Sodom. Well, why? If it's not a free will theodicy, that's what we're talking about. This kind of trope that goes over the Bible. You don't have to explain, you don't have to say Trinity in the New Testament for us to understand that there was a Trinitarian worldview in the Old Testament, two powers in heaven plus the Spirit of God in the Old Testament. And so Trinity doesn't pop up. That doesn't mean that the Trinitarian doctrine isn't found there. And the same thing with free will. So just because there's no, it doesn't say free will, well, sorry guys, you're gonna have to get over that. And there's just not words in there. But that doesn't mean the theme or the trope doesn't run throughout the Bible. And that's what we're trying to point here. And so the thing that pops up in my mind is this brother Brock, and he like just jumps in here. This is the guy who's like, 13. What about the context of let me try to pull it up. Yeah, here we go. What about the context? And so he even acknowledges that there is a rhetorical question here. But then the thing that I wanted to bring up here was he goes into this is talking about Abraham, and he talks about the order of Salutis. Let's see where this is at. And let's see, where was this? Okay. The Order of Salutis. Please note the Order of Salutis is noted by Augustine of Hippo, of course. I mean, he's like one of the founders of Calvinism. Calvin quotes out like 600 times from him, and very, very seldom, if not at all, from other church fathers. And then later rediscovered by the reformers. So there you go, is still applicable here. Here it is, his Order of Salutis. God chose Abraham. God spoke to Abraham as in he used his word. Abraham was given a new heart, and we know this to be true because he is then able to believe in what God has promised. And then Abraham acted on faith, and it was given to him by God who first sought out Abraham. It was all God's doing. Uh, Okay, so here we see this guy, he's saying the order of salutis is clear and true, and it's the Calvinistic, albeit Augustus of Hippo, that's who Calvin quotes a lot, his order of salutis here. And so let's see, is this true? Don't have my Bible here, but we're going to get into Genesis 15 next one. That's why I wanted to next episode. That's why I wanted to do this first. Is this true? God chose Abraham. Yes. God spoke to Abraham. Yes, okay. God, as he did in God's, as he uses his words, Abraham was given a new heart. Where? Where does it say that, Brother Brock? Brother Brock, you are inserting something here into the text. And we know this to be true because he was then able to believe in what God had promised. Insertion. You are taking your theology and you're shoving it into the text. And I'm saying, no, Brother Brock, no, that's not how this works. We're saying, and the reason we started at 3 is because God promises a redeemer, right? In Genesis 3. He doesn't say that you're not going to be able to seek my face. He says, this is, in my colloquial language, this is screwed up and I'm going to make it right. And so we see relationship continue in Genesis 4. We see relationships continue in Genesis 5, Genesis 6. And so what did he choose Eve for? What did he say to Eve? Through you, the promised one will come who will rectify everything. And then so later on, let's just, then he picks Noah and then he comes to Abraham. So God chooses Abraham for what? That is important here. And I've seen this a lot in the comments. That's why I'm bringing it up right now. God chooses Abraham for what? And so in Calvinistic theology, choosing and salvation are the same thing. They conflate two things. They say, God chose Abraham. Therefore, Brother Brock said it in his own words, he gave Abraham a new heart. But we don't read that in the text. They're squishing this story about Abraham into their order of salutis, or the only order of salutis in their mind, to say he chose Abraham for salvation in this case, this isn't what the biblical narrative says. This is what Brother Brock and other Calvinists are saying is he chose Abraham for salvation, and then he gives him a new heart, and therefore he was able to respond. So he does all this before he calls Abraham, and then he's able to respond. But we don't read that in the text. That's all I'm saying. It's Brother Brock. Where's that in the text? You are squishing that. You are taking that and you're forcing it on. So you're taking your doctrine, your doctrinal statement, your catechism, your theology that is based from these things, and then you're smashing it back into the text. I'm saying, no, the text is where biblical theology comes from, not from these things. You're saying biblical theology comes from these things and put back into the text. And I'm saying, no, the Bible influences our biblical theology. And we don't see any of this here in the Bible, in this narrative, which is why we're doing this study. And so, what do we have? We have Abraham being chosen for Genesis 11. Brother Brock, you went through that pretty good. The with your Calvinistic interpretation on it, we're saying that Genesis 3, God said he's going to provide for eternal life through his what? Messiah. That's what we know him as. And then Genesis 11, the world is trying to make a name for themselves and they're trying to re-inhabit the spiritual world without God. And so he hands them over to spiritual beings to be ruled. And God says, I'll choose Abraham for salvation. No, you put that in there for the lineage of the Messiah to come through. And through him, all nations of the earth will be blessed. So I don't know, Brother Brock, I'm sorry about that, where you're getting this order of salutis that's clearly and plainly taught in the biblical narrative here in Genesis 11, 12, and 13, 14, 15. Let's just say, because we're about to go into 15, where God chose Abraham. Again, for what? God chose Abraham. This is my interpretation. God chose Abraham for the lineage of the Messiah to come through. So God spoke to Abraham, and he says, "What? He to leave Tehran, to leave Mesopotamia, to go to Canaan." And what does he say? He actually doesn't do it. He moves a little bit into like Eastern Turkey now, and then he stays there till his dad dies. Well, he was supposed to go when God called him, but we won't look into that to that much. Abraham was given a new heart, not in the text. You are putting that in the text. That's not in the text. And we know this to be true because he was able to believe in what God had promised. You're putting that in the text, brother. It doesn't say that. It does not say that at all. And we're going to look at this really clearly in Genesis 15 that, the word in human form, in man form, comes to Abraham and, I'm going to bless all nations through you, takes you outside. Abraham believes, and then he is counted as righteous. Okay, that is the order of salutis that happens there. He places his allegiance into what God promised, that he would be the lineage of the Messiah, that he would have an heir, and then it is counted to him as righteous. So you, without the biblical text, brother uh, Brock and other people, other Calvinists, are taking your theology and putting it back into the text. And so, God bless you, brother. I thank you for being a part of the conversation, but your conclusion is not biblical. I'm sorry, it's not in the Bible. You are putting that stuff in there. So that's what I just wanted to respond there. It says, "Hi, this is Kukak Bear." Don't know what that name means, but hey, thanks for responding. I've seen you a lot on here, so I'm really thankful for your comments. And it says, if God of this world has blinded some, how do they have a free will to see? Well, we're saying that they just have a free will to see or to not see. That's up to them. That's God. Again, we're going to talk about this. I think it's in another comment that, you know, God is giving us the salvation. So the gift, I think this came up somewhere. I want to try to find it. Sorry about this, but a gift freely given. Okay, if whoever's listening right now, you give me a gift and I receive that gift, I choose to receive that gift. How does that negate the fact that you gave it? And that's all we're saying is God chose Abraham, God chose Eve, God chose X, Y, and Z, all the people that we could name, that the lineage of Christ would come through, and that if they trusted before Christ came, that this promise was going to rectify them. And then after, if they trusted, that's the gift from God. And so I know this pops up Ephesians, that, the grace, it's a gift of God. You are saved by grace through faith. Well, the grace part is the gift, but the faith part is believing in that gift, not of yourself. So you receiving that gift does not change the fact that the gift was given. Just, this is common sense. This is critically thinking. Okay, let us think about a gift. On your birthday, you're going to get a gift from somebody, and does you accepting or rejecting that gift change the gift giver's intentions? No, because eh, no matter what you do, you could throw it in the trash, you could slap the person in the face, you could do whatever you want. It's not going to change the intention or what the person who's given the gift wanted to do. And that's all we're saying here, is that God, his gift was for all humanity, and he decided this from the beginning. That's why we went through Genesis 3. Why did he create people? He wants a big family. That's why he creates people. He created people, and he created spiritual beings to have a big blended spiritual and physical family that he's going to rule the world with. Now, I know this is really, really hard for Calvinists to comprehend, because meticulous control of all things, the rape of children, Auschwitz, Birkenau, Dennis Rader eating people. This is all God not allowing it. This is God doing it. Why? For his own glory. And so it's going to be hard for you to come to the fact that God wants to rule and reign with somebody else, because he meticulously controls all things. But that's not true. What we're saying is God created spiritual beings, human beings, to have a family with. And in that family, he is going to, hand over his authority to what? What did he tell Adam and Eve? Go and spread my kingdom. What does he tell us today? Go and spread the good news. What does he tell us in Revelation? That we're going to reign and rule and be sitting on thrones with people, right? This is biblical theology. This is what I'm talking about. New Testament influencing the Old. And so this is a good segue here, because I had Brother Brett here. He said something that I really didn't agree with at all. And then let's see. So he, comes. He's baffled about the process here. You ask a soteriological question, and then intentionally ignore the soteriological passage of the Bible. Well, that's because I didn't go into the New Testament, because that's where you're going to find those, right? And he even gives an example here where he says, if you were studying the genealogies of the Bible, would you go to the Psalms? I didn't find any genealogies there. Could you speak definitively then? Of course not. And that's what I'm saying, is we're not talking about genealogies. We're talking about soteriology. So shouldn't the Old Testament soteriology be in line with the New Testament soteriology? Well, Brother Brett, he kind of says the opposite here. And I'm like, okay, let's see. I remember he says something with, okay, here we go. He says, okay, here we go. He's talking about the Old and New Testament, because I asked him, I said, hey, we're talking about theology here. We're talking about soteriology. And if Calvinism's true, shouldn't you find it at the beginning of the Bible? I've been saying this the whole time. That's the whole reason for the study, is going back to Genesis and saying, if Calvinism's true, surely you would see it plainly and clearly defined here in Genesis 3, where all of this takes place. Genesis 4, Genesis 5, 6, all the way up to 11. This is the ancient Near Eastern, the ancient Near Eastern context. These people believed the Old Testament worldview, that Genesis 3, 6, and 11 builds the world that we're in. That's how sin comes into the world, sin spread over the world, and this is where the new, this is where all the gods of the nations come from. That's what I talk about in Genesis 11. And so we are looking at this and we're saying, where is Calvinism in this? That's what I was asking at the beginning. Well, then he comes on, he says, well, it's in Genesis, I can think of some places. Genesis 18, Genesis 50. Okay, well, we're talking about the beginning of the biblical narrative here. Uh, so where is it in Genesis 3? Where is it in 4, 5, and 6? He doesn't come up with that, but he says, I wholeheartedly embrace the essential connection between the testaments. I talk about this all the time, so he's responding to that, in that the old is a necessary and obvious context for the new, but I'm a Christian. I'm not a Jew, and we are called to interpret and understand the Old Testament, the more obscure and mysterious of the two, in light and insights and teachings of the New Testament, not the other way around. So he's saying we're supposed to interpret and look at the Bible as a whole through the New Testament lens. And I say, absolutely not, brother. I responded to him and said, no, I believe that the New Testament, and this is fact, the New Testament's Bible, the New Testament writer's Bible is the Old Testament. And so when they're writing the New Testament, they're looking at the Old Testament and they're completing the Old Testament. It's really just the completion of the Testaments. And so they're looking at what's going on in the Old Testament and they're carrying their theology. That's why Revelation is a bookend to Genesis, Genesis 1 through 11, Revelation 19, 20, and 21. They're bookends. How? If they're looking at the Old Testament and they're writing the New Testament, and we should look at the Old Testament and interpret the New Testament. So that's what we're doing on this channel. We Thanks for the comment. This is a good point. We shall reign on earth. Revelation 20. Yes, brother. That's what I'm talking about here. And I saw the thrones. Yep, exactly. And so that's what's going on here is, we have this thing at the beginning, go, Adam and Eve, and spread my kingdom. Jesus, and that's what Israel was all about, right? So Israel is Abraham. So going back to Brother Brock here, God has chosen Abraham for eternal salvation. No, sorry. He's chosen Abraham to what? Be the lineage of his Messiah and to be his chosen portion. That's what Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9 say about Israel, about Abraham and his lineage. And Israel is supposed to be the chosen nation, the priesthood. Now remember, they're supposed to be the priests. They're supposed to be the holy nation, but they reject that, right? And why do they reject that? Because of God's eternal purposes from eons past? No, it says they were scared and they were like, he's going to kill us if we go to the mountain, because they just witnessed the Exodus account. And they look and they say, we're not going to go up there and become the royal priest, the nation of priesthood. They said, Moses, you go in our stead. And so Moses goes on up there. And so they reject that. And so, again, what I want to point out here is this conflation when they say he's chosen them for salvation, but that's not true. And the whole biblical narrative is telling us that if you would take this theology, this New Testament kind of New Testament centralized Calvinistic theology, and we say, you know, calling means salvation, and then you put it on Israel. Israel was called, or election. They do this with election too. Election and salvation are conflated as one. Well, that's not true. Israel was elected, but not all Israel was saved. Why? Because they didn't place their allegiance in Yahweh. They would still burn their babies to Moloch. They would burn their babies to Baal. They would, they went after every desire of their heart when it came to following other gods. And so election isn't one for one synonymous with salvation, but they do this all the time. They even do this with who he's called. He has the Romans 8, one of their favorite passages. And it's like, okay, called. There you go. You're saying that that's called is the one for one. So Abraham's called to, he's saved and he's given a new heart. It's not that. Like and I don't want to get into Romans 8 and 9 and all that kind of stuff, because I want to do special episodes just on that. And I don't want to make this too long, because I'm going pretty long here anyway. But a lot of these things that are popping up in the comment section here, are they keep repeating themselves. That the Bible doesn't say anything about free will. We talked about that already. The Calvinism puts, and I do believe this, Calvinism, here, let's look at this one real quick. Because Calvinism does ultimately put the devil in God's spot. So they switch the slots. Devil is the, adversary. He is the one that comes against God's plans. He wasn't always like that. He falls in Genesis 3. We see it's right there in the narrative. We went over that. Go check that out. And then God. So the devil is responsible for what? Sin, all these kind of things. Not everybody's sin, his own sin, and bringing sin into the world. And then you have God who is saying, hey, I have created you to place your allegiance in me with your own free will. And I know people are going to freak out and say free will is not in there, but this is the trope over. I place you in the garden. Trust me. I'm telling you what's good. Don't eat of the tree. So you have two choices here. You either have free will theodicy, where man gets to choose. He can pledge his allegiance to God and say, I know what's good because God told me, or I'm going to choose to know what good is myself. I chose that, and then that's what actually happens, and we know what happens after that. Or you have this Calvinistic worldview where it is, nope, God, he puts a tree in the garden, and then he tells Adam not to eat it or you'll die, but he actually makes Adam sin and eats that. And so and that's, the Calvinistic theodicy that God controls every meticulous thing, even the rape of children and the eating of people like Dennis Rader in death camps like Auschwitz. And so those are the two things. And I'm just saying, which one does the Bible repeatedly? Okay. So they get out of the garden, and the next chapter, the very next chapter, we see Cain. He is mad because he's not given his first fruits to the Lord. He's mad at Abel. And he says, what does he say? Oh, well, I created you before the foundation of the world from eons past to not be able to do anything about it. And so, uh, you know, grit your, uh, you know, grit your teeth and bear it, basically. Or does he say, if you do what is right, you know, uh, we went over this, but if you do what is right, it's in your ability to do what's right. So do what's right. That's what he literally says to him. We went over this. Which one is it? We just went over this in the last one. Abraham, the king of Sodom, take from me anything you want. You help me out. No, I swore to the Lord. Well, what the heck is going on here? Why would you swear to why would God even want Abraham to swear to him if he meticulously controlled him before the foundation of the world, and he from eons past by his, foresight and predestined him to do that? What what the heck? Why would he do that to Abraham? Why would he make him swear on top of that? It's already going to happen in the Calvinistic worldview. Or is it the free world theodicy again? That Abraham can choose. He can choose what he's going to do. And he swore his allegiance. So again, it comes down to allegiance. He pledged his allegiance to Yahweh, and he says, I am not going to take from the king of Sodom, that he may boast and say that I made Abraham great. I'm pledging my allegiance to God. And then what does he do? He follows through with that. Why wouldn't it be recorded in the biblical narrative right there that God made him do that and all glory goes to God? If God gets glory from the rape of children, if God gets glory for molestation and rape and killing and death camps and gas chambers and all those things in the Calvinistic worldview where he does it for his own glory, wouldn't he be glorified here? And wouldn't it be recorded here in Genesis where he actually makes Abraham um, be or where he makes Abraham keep his word, keeps the word that he promises. And so, let's see, we got another comment here. It's Brother RL again. He says, yes, Calvinism unavoidably promotes the same lie that the serpent, yes, proceeds, yes, brother. That's what I'm saying is that, it puts the devil in God's slot. And then in the devil's slot, guess who goes there? Because the devil, he goes into God's slot, and he's not accountable for anything. He's just the puppet. He's just, let's not say puppet because Calvinists flip over that. He's just a lump of clay. They can't get mad about that. That's, biblical. That's scripture right there. And then God, he becomes he's responsible for all sin, everything. And then if you switch those, this is biblical theology, in my opinion. You switch those two things, you have God who's not responsible for the sins of other free will beings, And then you have the devil who's responsible for his own sins. And this is what it trickles down to us. This is why we went to Genesis 3. Where do we see Adam's sins are going in, that Cain, okay, Cain's the next chapter. That's why I love using him. Where does it say that Cain is doing what he's doing because of Adam's sin? It should say that clearly, state that. So, Calvinist, that's up to you. I don't want you to explain Calvinism to me. I don't need that. I'm explaining Calvinism to you right here. I need you to explain where does it clearly and plainly say that Cain sinned because of Adam's sin. This is the next narrative in the biblical narrative after the fall. And if Calvinism's true, it would be there. Has to be there. This is where you would teach your theology if it was biblical, but it's not there. That's what we're saying. It's not there. It's not in Genesis 6. It's not in 7. It's not in 8. It's not in 10 or 11. And these are the world view building, cosmological chapters of the ancient Near Eastern biblical author. And so he's taking all these tropes and he's saying, this right here, I'm going to close up the Bible. And what does he do? He wraps it up exactly what I'm talking about. He says, from the free will allegiance, pledging the allegiance of the people who pledge their allegiance to Yahweh. There's not going to be anybody in there that didn't pledge their allegiance to Yahweh. There's nobody in the New Jerusalem who doesn't do that. And then he starts rewinding it, right? And so he says, they're going to be ruling with him, reigning with him on thrones. They're going to be given authority over the nations. Well, we already have authority over the nations, if you think about it, not in the Calvinistic perspective, because God doesn't need any of that. He he can't do that. He meticulously controls. How could you meticulously control all things, but then hand over your authority to reign and rule with your family? You can't do it. So it's a monster dictator versus the Heavenly Father who wants to share his inheritance, share his wealth of everything with his family. And so all I'm saying is, again, which one is even more, when you think about it critically, which one is more in line with what we deal with every day? This meticulously control, uh, really fear monger. He's you need to fear me because I meticulously control things. I guess if you don't, you'll get eaten by Dennis Rader or something like that because he's meticulously controlling that. Or this, hey, even with my family, I want to share my wealth. I want to share my authority with my kids that they would grow to be like me. And that's exactly what God's doing. He's saying, I want to share my authority. He already has. Go into all the nations. I'm in the nations. I'm in the Near East, sharing this stuff with them. Why? Because he's given that to us. And he says that you who do it now will be given more later. So these things are consistent. Okay. That's all we're trying to say. So, Brother RL, I really appreciate you being here and responding to this. Anybody else who's listening to this, I know this is super long, but I wanted to get into this because I've kind of felt like there was a misunderstanding. Like I'm just reading the Bible, and then I'm like, hey, where is Kevin? No, I'm saying I'm reading the Bible, and it's not in this text. And so, where is your biblical theology coming from? Again, let's always remember this: biblical theology derives from where? The biblical text, not from catechisms, not from doctrinal statements, not from any third party, and then you read that back in the text. It's the opposite. The biblical text is where our biblical theology comes from, and it informs those things. And I'm sorry, Calvinists, you have it backwards. And that's all we're saying is we're just placing that. Hey, the biblical text. You need to let the biblical text inform your theology, not the doctrinal statements and catechisms and writings inform your biblical interpretation. And then you get a really consistent view from the Old Testament into the New Testament. So that's why I love teaching the Old Testament in its original context, the ancient Near Eastern context, because we can understand, we just get more information, more data to parse these things, like the Trinitarian view of the Old Testament Jewish writers. And so they, as much as we might not see today when we read the Old Testament, it's there, and I teach it all the time. And so, love you guys. Thank you so much for your comments, again, even if I don't agree with them, I really appreciate it. And you guys have a great day. And we'll be back on here. I'm about to go on vacation, so I'm going to be back on tomorrow for Genesis 15, which is one of my favorite chapters. And then we're going to be going into a podcast. And so I have the podcast almost set up. But the first one I want to do on the podcast, it's going to be the same thing. We're looking in the scriptures, but I want to start with the quote that I use all the time, and that's, as unimaginable as it may seem to us. This is from John Piper's website, Desiring God. As unimaginable as it might seem to us today, that from the killings of Dennis Rader, eating people, to the death camps in Auschwitz and Birkenau, to the rape, to even the rape of young children, it's not God allowing these things, it's God doing them, performing them. And so I want to start with that because I quote it all the time. And if I start with that on the podcast, I can always just say, go back to episode 1. This is Calvinistic thought. And so if you want to share God's love with people, please share this channel and pray about supporting me. I do this pro bono, and so please pray about supporting the channel, and you can do that in a multitude of ways that are down in the. Actually, I think it's in the description, but it's, I have a ministry that helps me out over here, and a Patreon. So we love you guys. Let's talk about the love of God for all people, to everybody, and we'll see you back here on the next episode of the Calvinist Contradiction. Peace and blessings.